Administration scrambling to protect the financial sector following back-to-back bank failures. My next guest calls it corporate cronyism. He's here to talk about it. Senator Tim Scott, Republican of South Carolina. And you're the ranking member of the Senate Banking Committee, so I imagine that you were pretty busy over the weekend. President Biden put out a statement just a little bit ago that had to do with inflation and the banking issue. I want to read this to you here. I've said, and as challenges in the banking sector remind us, there will be setbacks along the way in our transition to but we face these challenges from a position of strength. Are we, though? Because Elizabeth Warren, one of your colleagues, senator from Massachusetts, she writes in the New York Times today that the bank failures were entirely avoidable. But I imagine that she probably likes the solution that the Biden administration came up with. What do you think of it?
It's just so ridiculous. Let's just get to the brass tacks. The bank failed for three specific reasons. Number one, the bank executives failed on their responsibilities. They bet on low interest rates while the Fed was increasing interest faster than any other time in the last 3 or 4 decades. Number two, the regulators were asleep at the wheel. And number three, the Biden administration's policies of printing and spending trillions of dollars led to a 40-year high inflation. The Fed comes in to slow that inflation by increasing interest rates, devastating to the average person in this country. Remember, the average household has around $5,000 to $10,000 in their average bank account. They're now going to have to subsidize people who had up to $5 million in their accounts. That is corporate cronyism at its worst. And unfortunately, now the question is, do we really have a limit on FDIC insurance? If you don't, it becomes a moral hazard and a perverse incentive for executives to take more risks because there's a lot of reward and no downside.
It's going to continue. We'll follow it today. And, of course, the Fed is going to make some decisions, and we'll be anxiously awaiting those. So I also wanted to ask you about this because Tucker Carlson, our primetime 8 p.m. Eastern host, asked all potential Republican candidates, and you answered, about America's place in the Russia-Ukraine war. I'll let you go ahead and explain it, but let me just ask you directly. Do you think that our participation is important to America's national interests?
Absolutely it is, without question. The question we should keep asking ourselves is why is President Biden not clear about what is our national vital interest? It does include degrading the Russian military. I think a part of the frustration that I hear around the country on my Faith in America tour is that President Biden seems to be just tone deaf as it relates to some of the security challenges that we have on our southern border, leading to more than 100,000 deaths because of fentanyl. We're seeing 4.5 million people run towards our border with very few people there to protect it. Thank God for our Border Patrol agents. And number three, we see a security risk because of people showing up at our southern border who are on our watch list. We have not seen the president in East Palestine. So Americans, seeing the lack of leadership here on the home front, ask questions about why is President Biden helping so much in Ukraine without an explanation. The explanation is simple. Degrading the Russian military. There is no blank check. We should have accountability for every penny spent. If we had that in place, the American people might have more confidence in the long view of what protects Americans here at home.
Let me ask you one last quick question. You're there in South Carolina, a beautiful place in Charleston. So Rolling Stone magazine is reporting about some state South Carolina legislators wanting to introduce legislation in the State House that would lead to making the death penalty available for women who have an abortion. I know that you are a pro-life person. What is your reaction to that there in your home state?
I haven't seen the legislation. I think it's a terrible idea. There's not much else to say.
All right. All right. Well, I'm sure that the left is going to make sure that everyone has to answer for some of these questions. I'm glad to have you on record on it. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Dana. Yes, ma'am.